People often said to American author Philip Roth, "Oh, you come from New York." He responded, "No, I come from Newark." Newark, New Jersey lies in the shadow of Manhattan, just past the Statue of Liberty. The city sits like an industrial anteroom before a glittering New York across the Hudson River. A small American city, like hundreds of others. Today, its name mostly conjures neglect and failure. But how did we forget its contribution to America? What happened to the immigrants that flooded into its factories to make steel, watches, and leather? Italians, Portuguese, Irish, and Jews, and other European immigrants lived among their own. Blacks arrived from the South. In 1950, Newark had almost 500,000 inhabitants. Today, its population has fallen by half. Those ethnic communities have mostly left Newark. They've taken different paths toward becoming American. Today, Newark is majority black.
You know, it's hard to be black in a world controlled by white folks. We always have the double consciousness. We trying to be black, and meanwhile you got a white ghost hovering over your head that says, if you don't do this, you'll get killed. If you don't do this, you won't get no money. If you don't do this, nobody will think you're beautiful. If you don't do this, nobody will think you're smart. That's the ghost. You're trying to be black, and the ghost is telling you to be a ghost.
Amiri Baraka, born Leroy Jones, Newark's foremost black writer, grew up in the city in the 1930s and 40s. He received international renown in 1963 when he published Blues People, a groundbreaking vision of music and African-American history from slavery onwards.
Newark was, at the time, a very segregated community. You know, my father, his idea of writing and literature and art was designed to expose, castigate, destroy all things he thought was ugly, and racism obviously was one of those things. And he also was about movement and politics. In 1970, he was very instrumental in making sure the first black mayor became the mayor of this city. Then his son, some 50 years or so later, becomes the mayor. It was huge.
It's never been about me. It's always been about we. And we have a lot of work to do. I want you to roll your sleeves up and get ready to be the mayor.
That the wider world knows anything about Newark is due in no small part to writer Philip Roth, born there in 1933.
Being a Newark Jew in a largely working-class city where politics was accrued through ethnic and racial pressure attunes one's senses to the perpetual clash of interests that propels a society. It provokes the writer. Newark was my sensory key.
Philip Roth understood that this working-class city was once a microcosm of America. In his more than 30 books, he often wrote of the city and the characters he grew up with. In his realist fiction, based on the Weequahic neighborhood of his youth, he wrote of the strivings of immigrant Jews as they move out of ethnic Newark into the American mainstream. Just what does it mean to become American? Roth left Newark in 1950 to search for greater individual opportunity. He never lived there again. Born a year before Amiri Baraka, their paths never crossed. Roth quickly assumed the stance of an individual artist whose sole responsibility was to his art. Being black, Baraka had no such opportunity. For him, art was a weapon.
We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy.
In 1964, Baraka met Malcolm X and embraced his radical response to black oppression. Malcolm believed that artists must lead the struggle. Malcolm's assassination shattered Baraka.
What Malcolm was saying, what he was saying for me was a trigger, a maximum weapon of legitimate resistance. The whole bullshit in America. Malcolm's death had thrown people up in the air like coins in a huge hairy hand. We would raise this fight to the highest intensity. We would not be slaves like this. The Black Arts movement would be part of that struggle.
My father understood that he was American, and because he knew that he was American, that it was his duty and responsibility to change it. You know, my father came back to Newark during the time in the 60s, the death of Malcolm X. A lot of people began to focus on black culture, black art, the beauty, the aesthetic, and being black as a direct opposition and force against folks who were saying the opposite. He thought that art had a purpose.
You ready?
So when I returned in Newark, I rented a house on Sterling Street and set up a theater with myself living on the top floor and, you know, the other part of the house, knocked down the walls and stuff and made a theater out of it. And that's where we began our operations.
Black art, black magic, the turn of the earth turns. And blackness is the perfection of the earth turning.
We began to organize based in the arts of bringing people into the theater, seeing plays, you know, discussing plays, even for children. We had children's plays, adults' plays. We started little newspapers.
Black art, black art, black art.
My uncle, Honey, he's going to plays. Now, Uncle Honey didn't seem like the kind of guy who went to plays. You know, he's a boxer and stuff like that. He said, everybody's going. So $5, you go down, you see a play every Friday night, the film on Saturday and stuff like that, all these programs at this place called the Spirit House.
What has America done for me? Nothing, but made me a zombie. Integration, segregation, dehumanization, demasculation, frustration, and complete annihilation if you are seeking a just education.
In these northern cities, you could see that apartheid-like structure. And coming back from New York, this was like immensely infuriating. And particularly since this was my hometown where I had grown up and the people had now, black people had now evolved to become the majority in the city. So it was a catalyst. It was an agitating kind of a situation.
History is white, civics is white, math is white, spelling is white, social studies is white, Santa Claus is white, and he coming down from black chimney. Shut up! No wonder black people hate themselves. America, America, why did you bring us here? America, America, why?
The Weequahic community was Zion for Newark's Jews. For 40 years, it was home to hundreds of synagogues and many thousands of residents.
Weequahic was lower middle class, working class neighborhood. Lots of Jewish families living together, very much like a village. And that's where most of the students that attended Weequahic High School lived. I went to Weequahic in the early 60s, and even in the early 60s, if you asked anybody from my generation who the greatest athlete at Weequahic High School was, they'd all say Swede Mason. Well, he is immortalized in the book American Pastoral because Philip Roth based the character, I think, Swede Lvov, on maybe his memories of Swede Mason.
American Pastoral is Roth's epic novel about 3 generations of a Jewish family as they integrate into America. Set in Weequahic, its principal characters are Lou Lvov, the uneducated, driven businessman, and his all-American son Seymour, nicknamed the Swede.
Swede came long before me. I never got to see him play.
The Swede. The name was magical. In our Jewish public high school, none possessed the Viking mask of this blue-eyed blonde born into our tribe as Seymour. Where was the Jew in him? You couldn't find it. And yet you knew it was there. No striving, no ambivalence, no doubleness. Just the style, the natural physical refinement of a star.
And Philip Roth's home is right here.
In this house, Philip Roth watched as his father Herman negotiated between the loyalty to tribe and the demands of becoming more American. In the plot against America, the details and facts of his own family life animate the book's principal characters.
We lived in the second-floor flat of a small 2.5-family house on a tree-lined street of frame wooden houses. My father was 39, an insurance agent with a grade school education, earning a little under $50 a week, enough for the basic bills to be paid on time, but for little more.
My grandfather wasn't driven by the desire to be extremely successful or wealthy or, be the president or CEO of Metropolitan Life Insurance. He was driven by his family. I think he felt a closer connection to me than either one of his 2 boys. Both of his 2 boys ran from him at their first opportunity and lived their lives. But living in America, there was a lot more opportunity and a lot more things that drew Philip and Sandy, his 2 sons, away from the family to go out and be more successful, move away from that world. My grandfather had a lot of success as a salesman in bad neighborhoods or bad offices where they didn't do very well, and they put my grandfather there, and he would turn the office around and make it profitable, and he would just keep getting sent to another really horrible place.
Herman went on to invoke out of my earliest childhood the insurance men with him at the Metropolitan. The veteran foot soldiers with whom he had gone out collecting door-to-door on Newark's colored debit. Coming home long after dark with his clothes smelling sourly of cheap cooking oil, there would be colored families, he now told me, still paying premiums 20, 30 years after the death of the insured. 3 cents a week. That's what we collected. How come they kept paying? They never said anything to the agent. The insurance man came round, and they paid him.
Poor people in Newark, and Newark was mostly black at that time, were forced to move 2 times a year, 3 times a year, because some urban renewal program was announced and they had to move. One of the programs that the government wanted to hoist upon the people of Newark was the medical school. The mayor of Newark, Hugh J. Addonizio, decided, yeah, okay, it's progress, let's put it in Newark. And the medical school said, okay, we want 150 acres of land.
First thing they were going to do was to blight all the land that they wanted. And they had already blighted part of 12th Avenue where I lived, and one side of the street was blighted, and they called that urban renewal. Mm-hmm. Well, I say it looks more like Negro removal than urban renewal.
Mm-hmm. Urban renewal was an incomplete response to the country's deep social and political schisms. Throwing money at the problem to reconstruct cities only consolidated the power structure. Citizens remained voiceless, while business and corrupt interests enriched themselves.
I asked to see the mayor, and I went up to his office. He said, if you had any sense, you stop fighting me. You stop fighting the city, because I can get you more money for your house that has been offered. I said, well, what are you going to do for my neighbors? He said, don't think about your neighbors. Think of what I'm telling you for yourself. I said, if I can't have it for everybody, then I don't want it. And he told me that, what was I so angry about? I should be happy that Newark was going to get a full meal instead of the cross on the table.
Louise Epperson was the woman who really started the formal protest against this medical school monstrosity. She was a homeowner, so she got the homeowners around her, and none of them wanted to leave because they liked their home, they liked where they lived. The designation of all urban renewal as quote-unquote progress shows the importance of the control of the narrative. What's going to happen? Well, we're going to bring jobs. That's another mantra. We're going to bring jobs. That has been a signature piece of all of the oppressive programs that the people in power have visited upon the people without power ever since this country was formed.
The titanic effort waged by Louise Epperson in the community changed the course of the medical school project. The medical school was built after 2 years of bitter struggle. It was reduced to 1/3 its original size, and there were guarantees for low-income housing and subsidized community medical care. The medical school experience also provoked a deep sense of anger in the African-American community. They confronted the depth of their political disenfranchisement. Newark's mayors were always drawn from its white ethnic communities.
The Newark community was restive, going through surface changes, but also changes in psychology, like myself. The Addonizio thing was so low that only the basest mongrels could defend it. Even mediocre civil servants shuffling papers in the dark castle of City Hall could see something was happening, and something further still needed to happen. The undercurrents were no longer completely under. There were bubbles in the water that suggested deep turbulence.
In the 60s, I was a federal prosecutor. A few years before I arrived in Newark, the Italian mob took over, and their candidate was a man named Addonizio. The city council was elected, but the mob controlled that machine. Even the local judiciary, the city judiciary. When the Kennedys came in, when John Kennedy was elected president, they were devoted to root out organized crime. Then the FBI broke into the offices of all the major mafia leaders around the country. They installed listening devices. What we proved was that Tony Boiardo, the man who controlled Addonizio, had the normal criminal activities, which was, loan sharking, extortion, and typically they required a 10% kickback, so that if you were a contractor, supplier, or engineer to public works, then you were required by the mob to tithe, to give back 10% of the contract. And Addonizio was reputed to have said, I can't make any money as a congressman, but I can make $1 million as a mayor of Newark, which he then proceeded to do. So Newark was really in the grip of the mob.
In Newark, what is new? Number one is race. Number two, taxes. Add to that corruption. There's your problem. The streets aren't clean, burnt out cars, people in abandoned buildings, and unemployment. Filth, poverty, more filth, more poverty. The projects. Don't get me started on the projects. Police on the take. Every disease known to man. As far back as the summer of '64, I told my son, Seymour, get out. Get out, I said. But he won't listen.
It was late July, I think. And we were sitting on the porch, and suddenly we see kids come running down the street, and then when they say, they're breaking windows on Springfield Avenue. And then I looked around, and suddenly I could see the sky begin to glow.
The previous evening, John Smith, a taxi driver, was pulled out of his car, beaten by the police, and thrown into the infamous 4th Precinct jail. As rumors spread that Smith had died, people poured into the streets.
I could remember seeing all those red lights down at the corner. It was about 10 police cars. Nobody was on the street now. Everybody had gone. We were the last ones there. And they almost killed us, killed me, actually, They were like beating me. And the only thing that saved my life was the people up in the windows who start throwing stuff at him. But the guy actually, when he opened the camper, and I recognized him, it was the guy I went to high school with. Italian guy I went to high school. I said, I know you. And he took the 38 and hit me right square in the head. Whap! And it just bust open like a, tomato. But as crazy as I was at the time, I was screaming at and understood it was that kind of strength of actually screaming at them that probably kept me alive, of actually refusing to be beaten like that, refusing to submit to that. If you're gonna kill me, I'm not gonna grovel.
My whole business is going down the drain because of that son of a bitch, Leroy Jones. That peekaboo booby-doo, whatever the hell he calls himself in that goddamn hat. Who gave me anything? Ever? Nobody. What I have, I built. But they took that city, and now they're gonna take that business and everything that I built up a day at a time. They're gonna leave it all in ruins. They burnt down their own houses. Oh, that'll show Whitey. Oh, that'll do wonders for the black man's pride. A totally ruined city to live in.
For 5 days, there was rebellion. A lot of that rebelling took place because of the actions of the police. There were 28 people killed, I believe, and all of them were killed by the police. The police said they were snipers. There was never any evidence found of a sniper. No bullets, no guns, just claims.
I lived in Huntington Roads in a Central Ward. We heard from the news that the police and the National Guard had shot Mrs. Spellman, who had 9 children. She was looking out of a window and they shot her and she bled over the 9 children. So from that point, we crawled below the window sill so you wouldn't be shot. During the war in Vietnam, I was used to watching the television, watching the tanks go after the enemy. And so when the tanks rode into my neighborhood and the turret was pointed at my house, I had an identity crisis, right? Because who am I? If the guns are pointed at me, right, who am I?
Let's get together and kill him, my man. Let's get together the fruit of the sun. Let's make a world we want black children to grow and learn in. Do not let your children, when they grow, look in your face and curse you by pitying your Thomish ways. 1967.
It is an exact kind of sane response to what was happening in the world and to people, right? If you did not scream out, you know, you would almost be insane. Like, that's why Malcolm X exists. That's why the Nation of Islam exists. That's why all these things exist. These are direct responses to an assault, a physical, intellectual, emotional assault on people's lives for generations.
My friends asked Levov, what are you hiring Schwarzes for? I hired them at the Newark maid factory and treated them like human beings. I came in every morning with my tongue hanging out of my mouth so I could lick their asses. How are we all today? My time is yours. I don't want you complaining to anyone but me. I'm your ally, your buddy, your friend. Meanwhile, I'm the one whose business they're ruining. Where's the Schwarzes' conscience? Where is their conscience after working for me for 25 years?
The white man has never been able to understand that black people can think for themselves. You understand this? We declare now that this is a lie. What is responsible for this violence, for this rebellion, is the inability of the city government to feel, as human beings, the plights of the majority of the people in this city. And that is the cause of this violence.
A week after the rebellion, the tanks left and they had the first National Black Power Conference that was located in Newark. And boy, I couldn't understand a doggone word that most of the speakers were saying. They were using big words that I didn't understand.
And here's Amiri Baraka, then Leroy Jones, with a big bandage on his head where he'd been beaten in the head by the police. And he's a magnificent speaker. And so he just leaped over everybody else in Newark who had kind of like been working hard to get to where we were. All of a sudden, there's Baraka.
We also agree with the Black Power Conference that we should support the acts of black people in rebellion against this oppressive racist system, that we support.
Well, it was great, really. It was fantastic. The Black Power Conference of 1967. And to have that in Newark was the greatest thing that could have happened, you see. Because then it made the people understand that what had gone down just a few days ago was not just, like they say, a riot, and I say it's a rebellion, but it was an absolute expression of the will for self-determination. And what the Black Power Conference did was give it an articulation, give it a rationale.
Almost the entire spectrum of black political leadership attended the Newark conference. The unity that emerged meant that black power would redefine the social and political identity of African Americans in Newark and beyond.
Going back to the 60s, it was a very transitional period of time, specifically in the Weequahic section. From 13 years of age to 16, the neighborhood started changing, and black families started moving in from other parts of the city of Newark. I think for my parents, there might have been some tension. And for my neighbors, there might have been some tension. The parents of my friends and many of the families that we knew on the block had already moved away. I think my parents were looking at the day when we would be the next family to move. And that eventually did happen.
While the rubble still reeked of smoke, where the devastation was the worst, a developer from the suburbs had arrived without a cop to bother him. They dug up the cobblestones from the narrow side street next to the Newark Maid factory and carted them all away. The street was gone when the Swedes showed up for work the next morning. Now they're stealing streets, his father asked. Newark can't even hold on to its streets. Seymour, get the hell out. His father had become the voice of reason.
My family actually moved to the Weequahic section in the late 1960s. My mother and father migrated from South Carolina. I remember seeing Stars of David all around, but never knew the significance of it. Never thought much to think about it. That got me really interested in digging deeper into the history of Weequahic and trying to put the pieces together. What actually did happen? Why aren't there any more Jews in the community?
Weequahic's invisible borders became permeable in the early 60s. Blacks in search of housing found opportunities in the Weequahic community. Jews were moving out. Owning a home in the suburbs became the mark of American success for Newark's white ethnics. The government, in league with builders, created freeways to make that happen. Route 78 was constructed in Weequahic with little thought for its effect on Newark's residents.
Route 78 had the impact, even before the first house was torn down, of eliminating the growth and the prosperity of that particular neighborhood. Photographer went around taking pictures of corners all throughout the city. And he took some pictures of this area called Watson Avenue. If you look at the pictures, it shows that there's life there, that there's a thriving community there. You have these storefronts with all the placards in front. You have churches, you have cleaners, you have grocery stores. It was a diverse community. You had African Americans, Jews, you had some Asians living there as well. And Route 78 came right through there. And you went in, I mean, folks driving up and down 78 all the time and have no idea that, oh yeah, there was a community here at one point in time. So you had all of these things happening because of this roadway, which in a lot of ways made the northeastern section of New Jersey very prosperous, right? At that time, the city was had already shifted from what we call, an industrial-based economy to a FIRE economy: finance, insurance, and real estate. Who were the people that continued to work at some of those institutions? Folks from suburbs. That's why 78 was built, to allow them to get from their beautiful homes, to cut through the ghettos without having to look at what was going on around them, to get right to downtown Newark.
I must come all the way. I had come all the way. I would go all the way. For me, the rebellion was a cleansing fire. One had to organize, one had to arm, one had to mobilize and educate the people. We began to meet regularly. The United Brothers, our small circle, grew from those whose imaginations had also been turned on by the fact of Newark's black majority. At the weekly circles, as we came to call them, we sat and discussed politics. What was going on in Newark? Who was doing what?
What was unique about the United Brothers is that they were people who had been in different social movements in Newark. So when they would sit down at the round table they would have, they began to develop an overview of Black Newark politics.
We wanted a black candidate. So the United Brothers met, and we determined that if we wanted a candidate that had a possibility of winning, we had to have a squeaky clean individual, right? Because we was going to run against what we considered to be a corrupt administration.
We had to run against Anisio. So the United Brothers said, we're going to have a convention to select who is going to run to become the first mayor, the first black mayor. And we picked Ken Gibson. And Ken was in the United Brothers.
We did a lot of stuff, That was a very, very innovative kind of campaign, At the time, it was easy to get people. Everybody you could name, Isaac Hayes, the Supremes, Stevie Wonder rode around in a truck all day in a bright yellow suit, I remember.
Look, the Irish ran the city, the Italians ran the city. Now let the colored run the city. That's not my point. I got nothing against that. It's the colored people's turn to reach into the till.
The campaign was one of the most vicious campaigns that you can imagine. It was based on pure racism. The whole projected concept that the Anisio folks had was that we're really running against Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka, the black nationalists. Sometimes they didn't even mention Ken.
Well, I think that we'd have to be concerned because of the people that he's identified himself with. Unfortunately, I think that he has extremist elements with him. I think he makes allowances for them instead of repudiating them.
Anisio is using me as a black herring to try to hide the fact that the federal government has indicted him for extortion.
In the wake of the uprising, the federal government could no longer ignore the pervasive corruption in Newark. In the midst of the vicious mayoral campaign, prosecutor Herbert Stern and his colleagues indicted Anisio for extortion and bribery.
We indicted the whole city. And we hit Anisio, half the city council, and we were off. Anisio asked the court to postpone the trial until after the election. We opposed it. Judge happened to agree with us. So we tried Anisio, and in the middle of the trial, the election was held and he lost.
treat the man who founded Newark over 300 years ago when he came here. I'm sure that he never realized that someday Newark would have soul.
In 1970, Gibson wins and becomes the first black mayor of a major Northeast city. Gibson becomes just a part of a small wave of black mayors being elected all over the country in major United States cities. And I feel like I'm related to everybody. To me, you know, electoral politics is like democracy self-defense, like is our ability to protect the institutions that we create, set up other institutions to help further our existence, our liberation, our desire to be self-determining, and to use it as a tool. It's not like a career, you know, for me, right? So I'm not like a careerist who people always, oh, what are you gonna do next, kind of thing, you know, so. You know, my father told me don't lose your poetry license. To me, it just means stay grounded, and I try to do that.
I was thinking the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company could have never sufficiently recognized what they had in Herman Roth. The company should have beatified Herman Roth as the church beatified martyrs who suffer for its cause.
Herman was never one to rock the boat. He was happy to have a job, and he was very proud of his success. My grandfather never spoke badly of the Met, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, never spoke badly about anybody there. Herman had 2 children through the Depression, so he was used to working hard, and he didn't complain about anything. He was working hard to support his family and to support his kids. Philip felt differently. Philip was more attuned to the Jewish aspect of it and what he felt was anti-Semitic, because Herman just wasn't treated well. He was a great producer. Instead of being promoted up, they basically just kept putting him in some crappy areas.
I was not unaware of the power to intimidate that emanated from the Gentile executives who ran the Metropolitan Life. I, like my father, knew that they had to be the officials who conspired to prevent more than a few token Jews from assuming positions of importance at Metropolitan Life.
Herman and his generation of Jews had little choice but to accept their lot against discrimination. Organized resistance was not an option. By the 60s and 70s, Black power meant African Americans could take a more active role against bigotry. Baraka opposed racism by creating a project that attacked housing discrimination.
People identify, I think, nationalists and Pan-Africanists more with rhetoric than, concrete delivery of goods and services. We wanted to demonstrate that our concerns were the same as the general community's concerns. That is, better housing, schools, the same things that the average brother or sister understands as being necessary, to transform our condition.
Housing was the biggest concern in the community. Now, Newark had one of the worst housing crises in the country. So Gibson was elected in 1970. No one broke ground until we did with Cowley Towers. Baraka had this idea of which we called Neo-African architecture. One of the unrecorded parts of the Black arts movement, people usually talk about the poetry, the theater, the music, but there were also discussions of a new kind of architecture. We had 16 stories in order to fit the zoning requirements for that neighborhood, and put a theater in the basement, library on the first floor, workshops, all those things, and it had balconies and the whole 9 yards. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Newark politicians showed up and stole the press by saying, why is this called Coweta Towers? Why isn't it called Garibaldi Towers? So that initiated a competition among Italian-American Newark politicians about who would be the leading racist in Newark.
The city of Newark was built a long time ago on black and white, and many people living together. I lived with black all my life, but not this kind of black like Jones, who desecrates the image of God and desecrates a man because it's not within his thinking. And I don't think that we should subject our children or anyone to it. It's just that this man represents something that's other than American. And the people are afraid of it. They have a right to be afraid of it because it is a very dangerous enemy.
All I got to say for you is, Leroy Jones, in your mouth. Leroy's nothing but a pygmy. Yeah. Racist swab. And those other little degenerate monkeys.
Anthony Imperiale was a product of fear. The white folks were afraid of what the black folks were going to do. There was a section of the North Ward that black people couldn't even go into. If you go across Bloomfield Avenue at that time, you would certainly get stopped and questioned by Imperiale's people, and sometimes beaten up.
The next thing we knew, the white mob started beating up my construction workers who were black. And so there was blood all over the place. And so my job became now going to the union hall to recruit workers to go to the construction site the next day.
My father, Lou, was one of those Prince Street guys who loved that city all his life. What happened to Newark broke his heart. He told me, I predicted it, didn't I, Seymour? Newark is finished. The riots were just as bad, if not worse, in Detroit. But mark my words, Newark will be the city that never comes back. It can't, Seymour.
I've supported housing development in the city of Newark, regardless of what group, because of the need for housing. Legally, we are, of course, duty-bound to protect the rights of those who are going to build, hopefully. And we also have a right, we have an obligation to protect the rights of people who wish to demonstrate.
Gibson, with any show of integrity, could have gotten Coweta Towers built at once. But he betrayed us again and let the state and county officials get in and declare an emergency and close the project down, which is exactly what Imperiale and company wanted all the time.
Baraka had a lot of dreams. This housing, that was his baby. He really wanted Newark to be a beacon that the other inner cities could follow. And I think when they buried Coweta Tower, he suffered from depression. Maybe that was the beginning of the end of the Black Power movement in Newark.
A lot of times people talk about the 60s and the rebellion in Newark and all the things that were going on in a very romanticized way. But my mother makes us understand that we can't romanticize all of the things that happen. And I understand that. She was in the middle of it. To us, she always makes it clear, like, all the contradictions that existed in the movement, everything that took place. She's unadulterated truth to her children about all of those places that they were in.
When I was still at home and my father was driving me crazy with useless advice, it caused me to smack my forehead and howl in despair. My nephews, Seth and Jonathan, raised in a secular ethos, were Jews in name alone. My father adored them, worried about them, praised them, lavished on them gifts of money, and a good deal more advice than they wished to hear.
He was strong and demanding, but he was softer with me because I was his grandchild. Herman, being the person that he was, very social, always helping, he made friends with everybody. And he told the door-to-door sales guy all about his son who was married to a woman who couldn't have children. And he says, oh, funny, I have a customer who's got a young Icelandic girl staying there who's looking for a home for her unborn child. That's how I was adopted at 3 days of age. And it was Herman that actually connected everybody.
A black kid, 14, approached him with a gun on the side street leading to their little temple. It was the middle of the afternoon. Get in the bushes, he tells my father. I'm not getting in any bushes, my father says. You can have whatever you want and you don't need that piece to get it. You can put that piece away. The kid lowers the gun and my father gives him his wallet. Take the money, my father says, but if the wallet has no value to you, I wouldn't mind it back. The kid takes the money, gives back the wallet, and he runs. And you know what my father does? He calls across the street, "How much did you get?" And the kid is obedient. He counts it, $23. Good, my father says. Now don't go out and spend it on crap.
By the 1980s, Herman's Newark had irrevocably changed. Ken Gibson remained mayor, but did little to reverse the dynamic of economic and social decline. The Milton promises of Black power were a distant memory.
It wasn't so much a matter of Black power being deficient, it was how Gibson used the power that we had. The power in the street must be combined with the power in the suites. We had the power in the street. All we had to do was combine that with the licensing that he now had as mayor, but he never called upon that other level of power.
Almost 20 years after the events of 1967 and the promises of Black politicians, Newark's social fabric continued to shred. Economic prosperity eluded the city. Police violence remained unchecked.
When I first got into office, they were doing the investigation of the police department. And unlike many cities, we didn't run away from it and say, this is a lie. What I thought and folks around me when we got into the administration that, yeah, this is real. I grew up in Newark, so I know that these things happen. And then we began to have these kind of public safety roundtables with police officers and community folks together, having discussions about trauma, police trauma from community, the way they view each other. My oldest brother went to jail. My youngest brother was shot in the head. If my sister was taken from me by violence here in my community, I believe that public safety is a role everybody has.
How do we know who we are? Except in the world, going through it together. How do we know where we are? Except with each other, facing reality like dogs straining on a leash. How do we know who are our friends and who are our enemies? Only by what they do, who they hold on to, who they fight for and support, who they help, who they feed in the storm, whose side they're on.
Roth. Oh boy, I think I might have found it. Here it is. Oh, jeez.
Then one night in a dream, my father came in. The dream was telling me that I would live perennially as his little son, with the consciousness of a little son, just as he would remain alive there. Not only as my father, but as the Father sitting in judgment on whatever I do. You must not forget anything.
And Philip Roth didn't forget anything. He understood the legacy his father bequeathed him. Herman's death marked the end of the Roth family in Newark. Thanks to Roth's uncompromising attention to the details of life and to the rich reality of Newark, we understand how the struggle of Herman Roth and his generation became part of history. The history of the Baraka family is ongoing. The struggles of African Americans have taken many forms. Amiri Baraka's fusion of art and politics has put the struggle for social justice at the center of Newark politics. This cycle of history is not yet complete. Just how does one become American? The answer remains to be written.